Coming up, as we continue to wait for the official start of the Brooklyn Nets NBA season, we reflect back on that big Damian Lillard trade and why the Nets standing pat ultimately improved their situation for years to come, plus potential moves on the market as we wait for the Brooklyn Nets to dominate. Coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, my friends. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, yeah, it's Doug Norrie, the owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off on your first purchase. And Doug, please, I know we're going to talk about the trade. We're going to talk about how the assets got better for Brooklyn, but this is almost like I put your photo on the milk carton. I waited to hear back. The authorities were not interested in searching for you, but here you are, returned from a lovely vacation at sea.
Yeah, vacation, but all this stuff happened in the NBA while I was gone. It was kind of killing me a little bit because, you go through the whole summer and you're trying to, there's things that sometimes there's a lot of stuff to talk about. Sometimes there isn't. And then we have this massive trade and I had so many thoughts and I'm stuck out in the ocean. It was a great trip, by the way, but stuck out in the ocean thinking, can I get on here? Is it going to be, but it wasn't going to work.
I was waiting.
Anyway,
I was waiting for the text of like, I might be able to make it work if you want me. And arguably,
I thought about it. But no, but like, look, there's so much to go on here. I know you covered a ton of it last week. It was great. You did an amazing coverage on sort of like all the different, and we're going to cover a little bit more here, but just in general, I mean, nothing short of a ground shift in the NBA with a trade like this, kind of out of nowhere, and makes total sense for everybody. Although not maybe for the Suns, who we'll talk about here shortly, but in general, this is like when you're an NBA fan, like this is just the kind of thing you wait for. Like this kind of move is what makes it kind of just super fun.
Arguably, Doug was more active on social media while on vacation on a boat than he is.
Had a lot of time. Had a lot of time to let the thumbs get to work.
Now, I will say, because as you mentioned, we talked about the Damian Lillard trade last week, but I do want to give you the opportunity to share your thoughts on it. And I think one of the big takeaways that I kind of hinted at last week, but we can drill down on for a moment, is that this still remains the superstar-driven league, where when a superstar of a certain caliber, because Damian Lillard's been saying the same thing in Portland in recent years, but when Giannis kind of goes on his tour saying, listen, I need to be where the organization that's going to be competitive, this is when a team like Milwaukee goes, oh, okay, what do we have to do? Who do we have to shed? Sending off even a 33-year-old, different caliber of player in Jrue Holiday. But in a lot of ways, it became, okay, fine, panic mode and try to get something done here because we need to satisfy a player that, if not, is going to get onto that short list of superstars ready to ask out.
And yeah, for sure. And you're smart as an organization to do stuff like that. You should work with your superstars. We saw this, the Nets go through this for a while. It's like why you want to sometimes just sort of revolve have a heliocentric organization around the superstars, right? Yeah. Like these guys, it's just hard to get them. I mean, we see what the Nets roster looks like now. It's when you don't have superstars in your roster, you kind of know to some degree what you're going to be before the season starts. So I think the Bucks from that standpoint did pretty well, but it's interesting too. Like, and this is, probably the crux of this episode here is that even though the Nets weren't involved in this trade at all, they're still affected, right? Like they're still a part of this trade. One, standing down and saying, you guys go for it, right? Like, we're not going to get into this was probably the right move in the end by them. But also, they are tangentially affected just by the moves that Phoenix made, and just to some degree, by the Bucks, but really specifically to Phoenix because of sort of like how the Nets' future to some degree, or to a lot of degree, is tied to how Phoenix operates here in the next 4 or so years.
And do you feel like, because that my perspective is that the Nets, by standing pat, I think it's the smart move, because you start to get into this again, into this fray when Damian Lillard mentions that, hey, I would go to Brooklyn because Mikal Bridges remains a guy that a lot of players in the NBA want to play with. But okay, we're going to hold off. We're going to stay away from it. And then in the background with the Suns moves, it seemed like they always wanted to get off of Ayton once they got Kevin Durant, even before they got Kevin Durant. But they get older. Like they get older, their now window becomes stronger, but they're 2 and 3, 4 years from now, I think got a lot weaker. And you can certainly expect them to be a potentially very rebuilding team down the road. And that only strengthens the picks that the Nets currently hold from them, in my opinion, going down to 27 and 28 and 29.
Yeah, they have the 3 picks, no protections on these picks, which is key, right? Because they don't, that's just going to be what they are, right? They could be lottery. We'll see. We've seen teams be able to pivot a little easier at times in terms of like getting out of their superstars and retooling a little bit. But if you just look at sort of who the Suns have on the books now, whatever you thought about Ayton, at least he was young, right? Like he was still pretty young. They clearly wanted him gone. He wasn't fitting into whatever the team or the organization or KD and Booker and these guys maybe thought as the future of the team. But if you start projecting the Suns out now a few years, it could start getting pretty dicey for them 3 years from now, which is right in the timeline of where the Nets start picking up these picks. And I always kind of thought the only reason I was a little bearish on how great the Suns picks could be was because I was like, well, they'll still have Booker and Ayton, and it's going to be no matter what you think of Ayton, it's going to be hard to be bad with those guys on your team, right? Like they might not be great. Like let's say Durant retires or whatever, and Beal drops off a little bit of a cliff here. I was like, but they're still like not old, right? Like there's that, and I always thought that like it was hard for me to envision those picks being like top 5 picks just because of Booker and Ayton. I'm like, those guys are just too good. They're too good. And now though, with Ayton off the books and replaced by like Nurkic and sort of
which could have been anything better. I talked about him and, could he be worth it in certain scenarios for the Nets or any team? Him being in this trade just gave me like, it made my NBA trade mind smile that he becomes this player. But immediately my thought was, well, this is when you look at Nurkic and you really crystallize why it's bad and why 2 years from now it looks even worse. And when you put him on Phoenix, why it continues to make the Nets position look that much stronger, right? And by the way, we'll even get into some of the finances around that and why in this scenario, DeAndre Ayton getting sent out and making this move, Phoenix, they didn't really recoup anything that makes you think as some players retire and move away, they actually have draft capital to still keep themselves afloat. We'll dive into that a little bit more here and then talk about maybe what are some of the other moves. Jrue Holiday, where is he going to end up? Toronto seems a bit frustrated, maybe with Pascal Siakam and their situation. We'll dive into all that in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Game Time. Look, when you're trying to buy tickets these days, you have one thing in mind. Have fun. Go to the concert. Go to the game. Go to whatever it is you're trying to get to. You don't want the buying of tickets to be the frustrating part. And believe us, we know. Out there, all these different places that you can think about getting tickets. It's hard to know, like, what's it going to look like from your seat? Am I getting the best deals? Am I going to be able to get into the place I want fit? Don't just forget about it. You have Game Time. Go to gametime.co. It's the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for sports, music, comedy, theater events near you. They got last minute deals. They got all in prices. Like I said, you're going to be able to see the exact views from the actual seat that you're buying, and they have the best price guarantee. They've even got flash deals, zone deals. It's all there for you on Game Time. They've just figured this thing out and made it really, really easy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app or create an account and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
Okay, so as we continue the conversation around the Brooklyn Nets pick situation, but also there, I want to get into, because already the speculation was Portland's not going to keep Jrue Holiday. Where is he going to go? Is Miami interested? Are the 76ers interested? Yeah. And can the Nets be involved in that in any fringe way, or even should they? That last note there, though, at the close of the first segment, how this is why I think you were starting to get to that. Never thought the Phoenix picks could be that high, but now there's a world where even while the Brooklyn Nets don't control their own picks, they could end up being high lottery picks. And I noted that Nurkic contract and his age. There's a world where 2 years from now, this Suns team is Booker and TBD. And you're not going to recoup value on a Beal, on a Durant, on any of these other guys. And that's what Ayton represented. Hey, worst case scenario, you can turn them into a few picks here to try to replenish yourself.
Yeah, so if you look at the timeline of the picks from Houston, so used to saying these Houston picks, it's like burned into my memory from Phoenix. So the 2025 pick, it's hard to imagine this being all that great, right? Durant is going to still be on the team, still playing. Beal still in his low 30s. Booker, obviously, he's great. So it's hard to imagine this 2025 pick, like really kind of any scenario short of catastrophic injuries to multiple players, that pick being great, right? Like in the lottery, that Phoenix team with that group is almost definitely just still in the playoffs. So let's just say 2025, that's going to be a low first round pick, probably at best. That'd be my guess. But 27 and 28, when we get there, that is where things start to get really, really interesting. In the end of the 2027 season, Durant's going to be 38 years old, right? Yeah. He's going to be 38 years old. And you made a good point a second ago, and you're like, sometimes with these superstars, i.e. what the Nets just did, they're like, hey, worst case scenario, we get something back for these guys because they can still play, right? Like that's what they just did with Durant. They just got a great haul from Phoenix because of it. It's like, okay, worst case scenario, we still get something back. We're Harden. It kind of goes bad, but we get Simmons and some picks, right? With Kyrie, it's like, well, okay, not really much, but they get Dinwiddie, they get Dorian Finney-Smith, they get a pick. Like they do get something back, right? And they probably sold low on him, but that's just the nature of the situation. 38-year-old Kevin Durant, who's going into a contract year, like, I don't know. Like, that's old, right? That's really NBA old. So you got him going into the age 38 season. You're going to have Beal with a player option at $57 million. He's going to be picking that up. And we're going to see what he's going to be. We're going to see what Bradley Beal is going to be at 34 years old, right? We'll see if there's a bounce back in here. Nurkic, that guy's already in steep decline, I think. And I'm not even sure why they did this deal totally. I kind of get it, but it still seemed like it was selling super low on Ayton for whatever you thought. Yeah. And after that, it's just like Booker at 31. Okay, it's fine. You're still in good shape. There's nothing after that. And not a lot of ways to recoup crazy value on some of these contracts you have outside of just going into the free agent market because they're off the books. And we've already seen that that's not like totally a viable way to rebuild your team. So now year 20, I know we're really projecting out here, but 2027, and I think we'll know going into that season easily, like how the Suns are shaping up. I think it's going to be hard for them to be like really good. It's just too hard to recoup. You're not gonna be able to get value on Durant at that point, and you're just gonna be kind of hoping he's still playing. I hope he is, but like, I'm not rooting for him to retire or anything. But like, I don't know, 38 years old. The guy's got a lot of injuries in his career. It's hard to totally see it.
And think about the fact that while you say where's the state of Beal's game going to be, obviously Booker would still be a centerpiece, but Phoenix is not necessarily, maybe up until the point when Kevin Durant said, well, I want to go to Phoenix to play with Booker. Like, okay, great. But prior to that, Phoenix is not necessarily a prime destination. Is Booker attracting stars to come with him? Or do you get to a place maybe where Booker is saying, I might want to move on? Now, the other world is that all this money does come off the books. And at a minimum, Phoenix will be able to spend money if there are guys that are out there and are interested in making that move. And maybe even guys with high price tags that they could go and have a team send to them. However, in totality, it looks like the situation has gotten that much stronger for Brooklyn. And let's feather this into the Jrue Holiday situation, who was sent from Milwaukee to Portland. And Portland is very much, everyone seems to think, maybe even before the season starts, that he will be on a different roster if they can get some assets recouped. One of the teams talked about here, and I'll feather it into this draft situation where in 2027, the Brooklyn Nets also have the pick from Philly, protected top 1 through 8. Boy, I tell you, I wouldn't hate if Philadelphia, even though it may hurt the short term for the Nets this season, I wouldn't hate if they get into this Jrue Holiday situation at 33 years old with an over 30-year-old Joel Embiid and whatever is going on there with them to kind of continue to push them into an older age bracket that wants to be competitive now, wants to serve the needs of Joel Embiid. And again, maybe 2 years from now, that looks like a very different roster. It now paints a picture where worst case scenario, the Nets may just have an opportunity to take maybe a top 10 lottery pick from Phoenix, maybe a top 15 even. 2 top 15 picks from these two teams and go target a specific lottery talent that they really like to go ahead and build out of what'll be the tail end of the Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson era.
Yeah, the Sixers pick is protected 1 through 8. So there's like it definitely has There are protections on it. It's not
the
open book.
Don't do too bad. Don't do bad enough.
Yeah. So right. It's like we wanted to right. So but top 15 realistic in there. And and with all these teams too, like look, life comes at you so fast with these teams. I know it's really easy to see it, look at it now and look at teams and say, oh, how bad can it possibly be? I mean, the Nets are a good example of how bad it can possibly. It can get bad. Like it can go, and not quick. Like the Nets are like in fine shape, so whatever. But it can go wrong with these guys. These superstars tend to not stay happy for long. It doesn't take much in the way of just circumstance to get some of these guys out. Like we said with the Bucks, they retooled for now. Their window is probably like 3 years now. They're in good shape for now. Bottom could fall out of that at some point. Embiid, you just don't know, right? Like he might just give up the goat and say, forget it. Like he wants to be out of here, especially if the team doesn't get a whole heck of a lot better. I do think Holiday will swing some title odds here, like wherever he goes. Yep. He's like a kind of a perfect piece for a lot of different teams. So I think we probably have to take a wait and see approach on where he is, but he's not exactly a spring chicken either. So I think setting up for the future around Phillies picks, around Suns picks, and we'll have one more Dallas unprotected pick out, but it's kind of really far out in 2029. Yeah, we're looking way in the distance, and maybe that's what you need to kind of do with teams sometimes, just to sort of tell yourself a story. But each of the stories you can tell yourself around the Nets right now look like they're pretty good, right? With these three other teams. I just don't think it's you can see a pathway for them to really have the bottom fall out of some of these situations.
And before we move into another question around the Brooklyn Nets and some fringe teams here and why maybe they can feel almost, hey, we got out of the superstar iteration of our roster at the right time. On Jrue Holiday, just quickly, because I was curious about your perspective. Dame Lillard to Milwaukee. Obviously, we know what his talent is, and you have Giannis, so that makes it the right move. But how did you overall grade that? Milwaukee jumped to the top of the NBA title odds, but there was something weird about it where Jrue Holiday he's not a superstar player, but he also is a critical type of player for you in spite of a bad playoff performance. We get that. But like, I was like, oh man, that obviously makes Milwaukee so much better. But they got less deep. Like it's a very fine line, the needle that I think Milwaukee tried to thread here. Totally worth it for them. But I don't, we may look back as we get down the stretch into the playoffs and say, what did Milwaukee lose in the background of this? And does it ultimately not pay off? Because by the way, it's title. Like that's what they're going for. Championship title here with that move.
Let's take a quick break. I'll tell you that one second. When it comes to Milwaukee, I think make this move 10 times out of 9 or 11 times out of 10. Like you do it every time because you want to concentrate as much talent at the top of your roster as possible. So anytime you can do it, I love Holiday. But when you talk about like defensive presence, like Giannis and to some degree Brook Lopez, and you can combine it with a top 5 offensive talent in the NBA, which like Lillard basically is, you have to do it every single time. Like I think the Bucks did a good job with Holiday. Obviously they won a championship, but in terms of like pairing that's devastating. I don't know who can guard it. There's no team in the league that can guard those two guys. Like no one has the personnel. And if you have to give up Holiday, you do it every single time. And good on them for doing it. Like that's hard. A guy won a championship for you and is a model citizen.
Yep.
And is great. Like he's a great player. The defense is unbelievable. He's probably underrated as a defender, which is insane. But you have to do that every single time. I loved it for Milwaukee. I think that it's like just the kind of all-in move you do when you are trying to appease a superstar and still win, right? Like sometimes you appease a superstar and it's bad, right? It doesn't make sense. In this case, it's like these two guys are paired perfectly together. Perfectly. And I just think,
and I agree with you.
I just think they're in a situation. Yeah. I just think they're in a situation now. And I have another thought on Holiday, but do you agree with from Portland's point of view? But I listened to all your stuff, so I think we're on the same page there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think ultimately when these things happen, especially when they're surprising, you're like, oh, let me hit this thing from 6 different angles and figure out which side I come on. At the end of it was like, yeah, of course, right? And we talked about this even with the Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving era and the James Harden trade, which we had those discussions with fans, right? You still make that move 1,000 times out of 1,000. You can't be results reflective on the decision at the time, and that's the way I think Milwaukee had to approach this. What's your Holiday Portland take?
Well, the reason that was so smart by Portland is because where I think Lillard had a concentrated market around who would actually want to take on the money and like the age curve and stuff. Holiday like doesn't have that at all. Like you could see 15 teams being in, I don't think it's gonna be that many, but like 15 teams could be in the Jrue Holiday market. Now you're not gonna get Lillard type bring back on him just because like he's just not as good as Lillard. But in terms of being able to blanket the market more and get more guys, there's just a wider market for his skills. Basically, any team in contention could use him. Boston,
Yes.
I mean, Milwaukee can clearly use him back, but Boston, LA, Phoenix, Miami, every single one of these teams can tell themselves a story for not like not 5 picks like for Lillard, but for 2 first-round picks and a player. Yeah, he can fit on any roster, right? Like point of attack, one of the best defenders in basketball, has offensive game, fits anything you're trying to do. The Warriors could get it. I mean, any team. Like you can name any team in contention could make a case for why they would want Holiday. So I think from Portland's point of view, getting him back was so great because now, okay, you get Lillard, you get a nice package. Now you add to that by just going out to 15 teams and saying who wants Jrue Holiday, and there's going to be like a mini bidding war for him because that's just the kind of player he is.
Agree with you 100% because, and again, the price point, right? 36 million and going into next year has 2 years left on his contract. We always said this with Damian Lillard. There's not a lot of teams that can take on $63 million in a contract. Yeah. And then just to your point, Jrue Holiday is not a superstar, but he's the perfect guy you want on your superstars team if you want to move the needle. Memphis even came to mind for me in thinking about teams kind of sniffing around in the fray there. And a lot easier when you're Portland who says, hey, we're in a rebuild here. We're getting younger. There's nobody off the table here, right? You're not worried about trading in conference. Wherever I can get the best package is going to be where Portland goes there ultimately. On that front, the other part of this that I think to round it back out on a Nets perspective is, so the Nets just stand pat. They say, yeah, we could do a lot of things, but we're not interested. I don't know if there's a scenario now, like how dedicated is Miami going to be to get into this conversation for Jrue Holiday? Seems like Tyler Hero, they keep dialing up and back the throttle on. Yeah, we like to put him in a package, or we can make him a real focal point of our offense. And at some point, when you miss it on Damian Lillard, if you're Miami, you have to be doing the evaluation of, well, is Tyler Hero at his age with his contract? Do we think about him as being a part of our longer-term future if we're not getting the big star right now in this moment? So I wonder what they're doing. The other team that I found really interesting, and this is mostly about, do you think the Nets will get involved in any of these future trades? The Toronto Raptors seem to be a team that also are trying to figure out how they stay competitive. They still have Pascal Siakam. But I thought about the idea of Jrue Holiday, actually, about the Toronto Raptors being in on a Jrue Holiday trade and bringing him in to pair with Siakam if they want to keep their competitive window open. So I fleshed out this idea where the Nets are involved getting a Gary Trent Jr., where the Trailblazers effectively get a couple of first-round picks from Toronto. Maybe the Nets send Day'Ron Sharpe out there to back up DeAndre Ayton in Portland. And then the Nets just kind of become a fringe player and get the guy on an expiring contract who's young and could be a part of it. Every level of this, do you think Toronto might want to get involved in keeping themselves competitive? Because the other way this goes is Siakam opens up, and now it's a free-for-all in the Eastern Conference with who maybe wants to bring him in.
I'm like almost done trying to predict like what Toronto's plan is here. I actually don't understand it at all. It doesn't
every 4 hours
sense.
You got to reset. Every 4 hours you reset with Toronto.
They just made so many different mistakes with like some of their guys, like Van Vliet. They blew it, get nothing for him. Like they've just made like they signed Jakob Poeltl to a contract, even though it doesn't seem like they're playing. I don't know. I just like don't totally get it. It's hard for me to imagine these guys coming loose because they don't seem to shake loose. Like I just don't know what exactly that they're. I'm not exactly sure what they're doing. And then you get like Lillard saying he'd never go there or not. So they're not exactly a free agent destination as well. If they were selling low on some of these guys, I would do it. I just have no confidence that Masai is going to do that. Like he just hasn't, he's gone the other way. It's been like a stubbornness to make any moves. And then he gets screwed in the end. So I just don't, it's hard for me to envision what they're going to do. They should have traded these guys so long ago and reset the deck. And they just don't want to do it, like or they want to do it, but the asking price is astronomical, or like they think guys are going to come there, or I just don't really understand. I don't know if I answered the question there, but it's mostly to say I just don't really understand what's going on with them.
Well, because and the other thing that came out of this situation with Damian Lillard was a lot of people were saying that Portland and their front office actually used the Brooklyn Nets model when it came to Kevin Durant. Hey, listen, we're not just going to push panic here and take an offer. We're going to be patient with it. Same thing, right? Everybody, media and otherwise, is going, it's Miami. Miami is the only spot you can send them. Take whatever they want to give you. Doesn't matter if you like Tyler Hero or whatever it is. You just take the package. Just take the package. And no, we're going to wait. And we'll find an opportunity here. And ultimately, that's what they end up getting. Far better.
Good for them, too, by the way.
Now than they would have with Miami. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just said good for them for doing it that way, too. And, like, I know that, like, they got dragged in some of the reporting, like the Haynes piece. I mean, couldn't have been any more one-sided. I think they probably didn't do perfectly with Lillard. But, yeah, the part where, like, we have seen enough examples now, like Ben Simmons with Morey, right? Simmons with Morey with Harden now, too. Marks with Durant, these guys, gone or seem to be the days of like the Anthony Davis. I'm going here, this one place, and you're going to do it and forget about it if nothing happens. Right. Like that doesn't seem to be what's happening anymore. So I don't mind that part from an NBA model. I understand why these guys kind of want to dictate their future too. Cause I get it, but it is, I do think there's been some pages taken out of this situation to say we're not, and the NBA has kind of said, hey, knock this off. Like, don't do this. Right. You can't, like, we're going to fine you. If you say you're only going to one place, you're going to get fined. Like, it's just, you can't do it. It's tampering, right? Like you can't. So anyway, I'm with it from that standpoint. I like it that it just seems like everyone's sort of more in the game.
Yeah, and I think it's important. And then just to your point on Toronto or any of these teams, and the Nets maybe fall into this category too. It's like I wonder if Toronto is trying to do that model, but they just don't have the superstar. They have Pascal Siakam, who is right there at the top of your number 2 elite, but not quite there, and maybe isn't perceived the way in terms of fitting in a lot of different places, like a Jrue Holiday, right? So sometimes it depends on like, who is your asset? What is your asset? What is the contract? And where is the appetite for those players? And that can be a dangerous game when you are a small market team, relatively speaking, and I can't just turn this over. And that's what creates hesitancy, right?
Real quick, before we get out of here, I did want your opinion on one thing because I was thinking about this while I was gone. Does it give you more confidence in the Marks administration here around like sort of like keeping a steady hand around the Lillard part? It doesn't sound like they were ever close to this. Like for as much as like their name was mentioned, it just doesn't seem like anything was close at all. Right. Do you it's saying like, better, same, worse in terms of like how you view Marks going through this Lillard process?
And I think I've been relatively positive. I think better. Like I think I come out of it thinking better because, again, through the prism of the Nets, if the Nets got in on this and you send Nicholas Claxton to the Portland Trailblazers to get Damian Lillard back, right, and you send out some other pieces here, does it make them a better team? Of course it does. But 2 years from now, would we say the Nets won a championship and now they're shifting into the next era? No, it wouldn't. And I think at some point, you and I talk about this all the time, you have to view your team and the NBA in tiers and by expectations. The Brooklyn Nets want to be a consistent playoff team right now. And shooting their shot, coming off of missing their shot with superstars, would just, I think I would look at Sean Marks and the organization and say, oh, they are still panicking. They are still trying to win the perception battle where everything that they've done off of the Kevin Durant trade seems to be, I don't agree with everything, but seems to be built in the foundation of, no, we have a long-term idea. We've drafted well. We develop players well. We find some nice guys. We can continue to work our process and not be beholden to what the media says we failed with and what we need to do to stay relevant, right?
Yeah, totally. That's where I came out of it too. I was like, okay, good. I just, as much fun as it would be to watch Lillard play with the Nets, I think, and how much fun like the next couple seasons would be, just because it's great to have great players in your team. It just probably wouldn't have been prudent for a good future outlook of the team. All right, we're gonna get out of here. Good to be back. Glad to be back in the saddle here on dry land once again. Make sure you're signing up over there. Join Subtext. Just getting Nets texts every single day from Adam and I, keeping the conversation going. Join subtext.com/LockedOnNets.
People keep asking if I'm back, and I haven't really had an answer. But now, I'm thinking I'm back. That's not only John Wick, but also Doug Norrie.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.